pregnant. Don't do this.
Hands behind your back. Now!
I didn't do anything wrong.
You should have thought about that before talking back.
The red and blue lights in her rearview mirror came without warning. Simone Hargrove had been driving carefully. She always did, especially now, in her 31st week, when her doctor had added a third pillow to her bedtime routine and told her that stress was the most dangerous thing she could encounter. The seat was reclined just slightly. Low gospel played on the stereo. The windows were clean, the tags were current, and every light on the silver Volvo was working perfectly. She had done nothing wrong. She pulled to the shoulder of Dunmore Avenue with both hands visible on the wheel, set the car in park, and waited. Her mother had rehearsed this moment with her so many times it lived in her bones minus hands where they can see them, voice low and steady, no sudden movements. The coaching of a black woman raising a black daughter in America. Practical, loving, exhausting. She watched the officer's door open in her side. Mirror, his boots clicked against the asphalt. Simone took one slow breath and placed both hands on top of the steering wheel, fingers spread wide. She had no idea that the man walking toward her had spent the last year of his career appearing in her files. She had no idea that what was about to happen on this quiet Tuesday afternoon would force the governor of Georgia to call an emergency press conference. She had no idea that in 6 weeks she would name her daughter after a woman she had never met whose buried complaint was about to be unearthed by the very crime being committed against her right now. The boots stopped outside her window, a knock on the glass, and it began.
The window rolled down. The afternoon air came in warm and still, carrying the faint smell of asphalt and cut grass from the yards along Dunmore Avenue. The officer filled the frame of the window, heavy-set, pale, mid-40s, with the kind of face that looked permanently offended by something. His name tag read Mercer. His hand rested on the door of the car, not gripping it, just resting, the casual gesture of a man who had done this 1,000 times and knew exactly how it would go. He looked at her. Then he looked at her belly. Then he looked back at her face. Whatever he had expected to see in her eyes, fear, submission, the usual quiet deflation, it was not there. Simone met his gaze with the same steady calm she brought into courtrooms and briefing rooms and the governor's conference room on the hardest days. She had been trained for exactly this moment since she was 12 years old. It lived in her like a second heartbeat. License and registration, he said. No greeting, no ma'am, just the words, flat and final, as if this were already over and he were just waiting for her to catch up. Good afternoon, officer. She kept her voice even, her movements deliberate. She produced both documents from the glove compartment and held them out with both hands visible. May I ask the reason for the stop? He took the documents without examining them. You rolled through the stop sign back there. A pause. One beat. She let it settle before she responded. I don't believe I did. Something shifted in his jaw. A tightening. Barely visible, but she caught it. Are you telling me I'm wrong? I'm telling you I came to a complete stop. My dash cam will confirm that. She glanced at the small camera mounted on her dashboard. Is there anything else I can help you with today, officer? She watched his eyes. She had seen that look before, not on this face, but in report after report, complaint after complaint, description after description filed by women who had sat in this exact seat and looked up at a face exactly like his. That specific moment when a man like this decides that composure is provocation, that being right, being calm, being completely unbothered is somehow the most intolerable thing he has ever encountered. Step out of the vehicle. Simone did not move. On what grounds? I said step out of the vehicle, ma'am. Officer, I am 31 weeks pregnant. I have not committed a traffic violation. I am asking you to articulate the legal basis on which you are directing me to exit my vehicle. He leaned into the window. She could smell the gas station coffee on his breath, stale and bitter, the smell of a man who had been driving these streets angry for hours. "One more time," he said very quietly. "Get out." Simone reached slowly and deliberately into the center console and produced her phone. She opened the camera application. She pressed record. His hand shot through the window. "Put that down. I have a legal right to record a police interaction in the state of Georgia. You have the right to do what I tell you to do." She did not put the phone down. He opened the car door himself. Simone eased out slowly, one hand on her belly, one on the door frame, her recording phone still in her grip. She was not fast. He did not wait for her to be. He reached for her arm and turned her toward the hood of the car. Her phone clattered to the asphalt. Through the passenger window, the briefcase on the seat was visible. Dark leather, brass clasp stamped with the governor's seal. "Open that bag," he said. "No." Her voice did not move. "That bag contains privileged government materials. You do not have my consent or lawful grounds to search it. I can have it. You cannot. That is a statement of law, officer, not my opinion." He reached for his cuffs. "You are under arrest." "Claw, for what charge?" "Obstruction." "I have complied with every IC." The click of the handcuffs ended the sentence. Simone Hargrove stood on the shoulder of Dunmore Avenue, 31 weeks pregnant, hands cuffed behind her back. Her government ID lay face up on the asphalt where it had fallen, the gold governor's seal catching the afternoon light. She did not cry. Her phone had skidded 3 feet away, screen down. What Officer Mercer did not know, what he could not have known, was that the recording application she used backed up in real time to a cloud account. It had been uploading from the very first second she pressed record, every frame, every word. She looked at the space in front of her and said 3 words, calm as stone. "I have everything." Now you need to understand exactly who Dale Mercer had just put in handcuffs on the side of Dunmore Avenue. Simone Renee Hargrove was 34 years old, and there were very few rooms in the state of Georgia she was not allowed to walk into. She had graduated summa cum laude from Spelman College at 21, then taken her law degree from Yale, where a professor had pulled her aside after a seminar and told her, privately, in the careful voice of a man who had spent 30 years in lecture halls and did not offer this lightly, that she had the sharpest legal mind he had encountered in his entire career. She had clerked for a federal judge in the 11th Circuit. She had spent 4 years as a civil rights attorney winning cases that established precedents cited in courtrooms across 11 states. 3 years ago, Governor Marcus Webb had called her directly and offered her a position that most lawyers twice her age would have fought each other raw to obtain. Chief Legal Counsel and Special Advisor to the Office of the Governor of Georgia. She had been in her office reviewing depositions when the call came in. She had not recognized the number. She had almost sent it to voicemail. Governor Webb introduced himself without ceremony and said, without preamble, "I've read your Jenkins brief 3 times. I want you in my office. Tell me what it would take." She said she needed to think about it. He said he would call back in 2 days. He called in 1. She took the position not because of the title or the salary, though both were significant, but because of a single sentence near the end of that second conversation. "I want someone in this office who is angrier about this than I am, and smarter about it too." She told him those 2 things were not always compatible. He said he suspected she was wrong. She took the job partly to find out. She was, in the plainest terms available, the woman who told the governor what the law meant. Before that, she had been the lawyer who took the cases other lawyers advised their clients to settle. The Jenkins case, in 2019, established that Georgia municipalities could be held liable for patterns of discriminatory traffic enforcement, a ruling 3 federal courts had since cited in their own decisions. She had argued it before a panel of 3 judges who had initially seemed skeptical and finished the argument having convinced all 3. The lead judge had told her afterward, in the hallway with his robe still on, that it was the finest oral argument he had witnessed in 11 years on the bench. She had thanked him and gone directly to the parking garage to call her mother. The Marcus Howard case had come 2 years before that. Howard was a 19-year-old who had been stopped 17 times in 8 months by the same 3 officers in the same half-mile stretch of Atlanta. She had taken his case for free. She had spent 14 months building it. When the jury came back, Howard was in the gallery and his grandmother was sitting beside him holding his hand with both of hers. Simone had not cried in the courtroom. She had been trained not to, trained that the face you show in a verdict is the same face you showed in the opening, but in the car afterward she had pulled over twice and sat on the side of a road for 11 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. She was also 31 weeks pregnant with her first child, officially on medical leave, and absolutely should not have been spending every morning at her home desk reviewing the 512 pages of internal police complaint records that had landed on her desk 3 weeks before her. Leave began. The pregnancy had not slowed her down as much as everyone had expected, and slightly more than she would admit. She moved differently now, more deliberately, more carefully, as if she had become conscious of the weight she carried in a way she hadn't been before. She slept in intervals and woke at 3 a.m. with the particular clarity of a body that had decided rest was negotiable. She had converted the spare bedroom into a home office in her 6-month, second monitor, file printer, the small whiteboard where she tracked the Meridian case numbers, and told herself she was just keeping up with correspondence. That was not what she was doing. Calvin Ross, her deputy, knew it. He called every Tuesday morning at 10 to update her, which was mostly him making sure she had eaten breakfast and had not been working since 5. She appreciated it more than she told him. She appreciated it because she knew he was right and she could not stop anyway. The work was the thing that steadied her. It had always been the thing, the way some people run or pray or cook. Simone read case files and made sense of patterns that other people either couldn't see or chose not to look at. The kitchen table had become her morning post. Before the rest of the house stirred, she came downstairs in her robe with her tea going cold beside her and opened the files in the quiet. On good mornings she worked for 2 hours before her phone started. On the morning of the stop she had been at the table since 5:43, her yellow highlighter moving slowly down a page that bore the name of a man she had never met and whose file she had nearly memorized. The case was called the Meridian Project. Internally, only 7 people knew its full scope. Over 14 months, it had assembled documented evidence of a pattern. Black drivers in Fulton County's District 7 were being stopped, searched, threatened, and in several cases wrongfully arrested at rates that no statistical model could explain except through deliberate targeting. 31 formal complaints. 14 withdrawn under circumstances the investigation had flagged as suspicious. 9 of those withdrawals occurring after the complainants reported follow-up visits to their homes from officers in the district. It had begun with a spreadsheet. Calvin had pulled the raw stop data from District 7's public reporting records 14 months ago and noticed something he initially thought was a data error. The rate of stops resulting in no arrest, no citation, and no documented cause was running at 4 times the district average for black drivers, clustered in a geographic pattern too tight to be random. He had flagged it to Simone on the Tuesday. By Thursday, she had requested the full complaint records. By the following Monday, she had a timeline. What the timeline showed was not dramatic in the way that the most damaging things rarely are. It was not a single incident or a single officer making a spectacular mistake. It was the accumulation of ordinary moments, stops that lasted 40 minutes for no documented charge, Searches recorded as consensual that the complainants described differently, complaints filed and then quietly withdrawn. The pattern was constructed to be invisible. Each stop, examined alone, looked like policing. Examined together, across 31 formal complaints and 14 months, it looked like something the law had a specific name for, and Simone had used that name in 3 federal filings and understood it in a way that went beyond its legal definition. She understood it as a thing that happened to real women on real roads, in real cars, with their hands visible on the steering wheel. She had printed the Deanna Watts complaint file at 7 o'clock that morning and read it twice before she left for her appointment. Watts had been 7 months pregnant when Dale Mercer pulled her over on Dunmore Avenue. She had done nothing wrong. She had sat on the shoulder of that road for 43 minutes and then been released without charge, her hands shaking on the wheel the whole drive home. She had filed the complaint the following day, alone, in a precinct building where she did not recognize a single face. The complaint had been closed in 6 days with a single notation. Officer conducted himself within department guidelines. Simone had highlighted those 6 words in yellow and written 4 of her own in the margin beside them. This goes to the AG. She had meant to send that referral the following week. She had gotten in her car instead. One name appeared in more complaints than any other officer on the roster. Badge number 70702. Officer Dale Mercer, 15-year veteran, not a single formal discipline on record. Simone had read his complaint history so many times she could recite the case numbers from memory. That very morning, before her prenatal appointment, before she had gotten into this car, she had been at her kitchen table in her robe with a yellow highlighter in her hand and his file open in front of her, working through the complaint of a woman named Deanna Watts, pulled over while 7 months pregnant, ordered out of her vehicle, detained for 43 minutes without charge or explanation. Complaint filed, complaint buried, case closed. Simone had highlighted the closing notation in yellow. In the margin, in her own handwriting, she had written 4 words. This goes to the AG. That briefcase on the passenger seat, the one Dale Mercer had just demanded she open, the one she had refused, contained her laptop, her annotated Meridian draft, and a signed letter of engagement from the State Attorney General authorizing her role as lead investigative counsel on case. Year all 2024-31. She hadn't just been pulled over by the subject of her investigation. She had been handcuffed by him. Dale Mercer was 46 years old and had been a police officer for 15 of them, which meant he had spent roughly a third of his adult life with a badge on his chest and a gun on his hip and a set of permissions he had never fully articulated to himself but had always known were there. He had grown up in Cobb County, the second of 3 sons, in a house where the television was always on and the dinner conversation was mostly about what was wrong with the world and who was responsible for it. His father had been a corrections officer for 22 years, and the way his father talked about that job, the authority of it, the necessity of it, the sense of standing between order and chaos, had formed Dale in ways he had never examined and would not have known how to name. He had joined the force at 31, later than most, after a decade of construction work and a business venture that hadn't survived its 2nd year. He had not been a bad officer at the beginning. That was the honest account, and the record, read neutrally in those early years, would bear it out. He had been thorough, he had shown up on time, he had handled domestic calls with more patience than many colleagues, because he had grown up in a house where raised voices were common, and had learned early how to read a room. In his 4th year, he had received a commendation for talking a man down from a bridge on I-285 in 40 minutes of cold rain. That commendation was still framed on the wall of his home office, above a desk that had been his father's. The shift had not happened on a single day. It happened the way most things in a man's character happen, gradually and then all at once, made up of small decisions that felt, in the moment, like common sense. His colleagues had not changed. The department had not changed. What had changed, slowly, was the story he told himself about the work. In the beginning, the story had been about service, about showing up, about being the person who arrived when other people called. Somewhere in the middle of it, without a particular moment he could identify, the story had become about something else, about order, about the proper arrangement of things, about people who understood how the world worked and people who didn't, and the constant low-level friction of patrolling the boundary between them. Dale Mercer had been having what he privately considered the worst 3 weeks of his adult life. His wife, Karen, had moved out 17 days ago. She had taken the dog, the good coffee maker, and left a note on the kitchen counter that was 3 sentences long and somehow said everything. He had read it 11 times before crumpling it and throwing it toward the trash. He had missed. He had met Karen at 33, 2 years into the job, when he was still the version of himself he preferred to remember. She had been practical and warm and direct in a way he had initially found refreshing and later found difficult to live under. She had seen him clearly from early on. He had taken that as intimacy. It took him 12 years to understand that being seen clearly is only a gift if you are willing to look at what is being seen. Karen had told him in the note, and then in the single phone conversation they had since, that she had not left because of any one thing. She had left because of the accumulation. The way he talked about certain people when he came home from his shifts, the stories he seemed to enjoy in a way she found, after 12 years of marriage, increasingly difficult to sit across from. The way District 7 had become, in his telling, a place where problems all had the same shape. She had not used the word she was thinking of. She had not needed to. He had heard it in the space around the words she did use, and he had hung up the phone and stood in the kitchen for a long time afterward, looking at the spot where the good coffee maker used to be. The promotion to sergeant, the one his lieutenant had all but guaranteed him over beers at the district picnic, had been announced and given to Officer Darius Freeman. Freeman was younger by 9 years, had fewer years on the force, and had been handed the rank that Dale believed, in the deepest chamber of his resentment, had always belonged to him. The announcement had been made in front of the entire district. Dale had clapped. He had managed a smile. Then he had gone to his cruiser and sat alone for 22 minutes gripping the steering wheel until his palms ached. Freeman's speech had been short and gracious. He had thanked his family, his training officers, named 2 colleagues. He had not mentioned Dale, which was reasonable. They were not close, had never been close. But Dale had stood in that room and listened and felt the specific physical humiliation of being in a crowd of people applauding something he believed had been taken from him. 14 years. He had given 14 years to this district, to this precinct, to the grinding daily work of keeping order in streets that nobody with a choice chose to walk at night. The rank had gone to Freeman. 9 years on the force. 9. On the drive home from the ceremony, he had thought about his father. His father had worked 22 years in corrections and retired at the same pay grade he had entered, and had spent the last decade of his life telling anyone who would listen that the system was rigged, that honest work was no longer valued, that the people who got ahead were the ones with the right connections. Dale had listened to all of this growing up at the dinner table and believed none of it because his father was bitter, and bitterness was something Dale had promised himself he would never become. On the drive home from the ceremony, he thought about that promise too. He drove District 7 because it was his territory. He had worked it for a decade. He knew every block, every face, every car that didn't belong. And when the weight of everything he was carrying got too heavy, this is where he came. to remind himself that here, at least, he was still the one with the badge. He knew the names of shop owners on Dunmore Avenue. He knew who parked where, who walked dogs at what time of morning, which houses had security cameras and which had gaps. He knew all of this in the way a person knows a neighborhood they have never been asked to leave. It was a comfort and a confirmation. When other things in his life failed, the marriage, the promotion, the steady reduction of everything to the size of what had gone wrong, District 7 remained. The street names stayed the same. The rhythms stayed familiar. The authority of the badge stayed real and immediate in a way that nothing else in his life had felt in years. He had a system in District 7, though he would never have called it that. He would have called it instinct, experience. The knowledge that accumulates from years on the same streets until the smallest deviation registers before you can name what you've noticed. His instincts, he believed, were reliable. His official record supported that belief. 15 years, and not a single formal discipline. Whatever complaints had been filed, they had not landed. 9 complaints had been withdrawn. He had not arranged those withdrawals specifically or directly. He had simply made himself visible in the neighborhoods where the complainants lived in the days after each filing. Not threatening, he was not stupid enough to be overtly threatening, just visible. A reminder that he was there, had always been there, and intended to keep being there. The complaints had gone away on their own. That was how he understood it. 2 years before the stop on Dunmore Avenue, a woman named Clara Reed had filed a complaint against him. She'd been stopped on a Tuesday afternoon and detained for 38 minutes without charge. Her complaint had been detailed. Timestamps, a witness name, a description of what had been said at the window. It was the most specific complaint he had ever received. It had been closed in 4 days. He had not been told why exactly, only that it had been reviewed and found insufficient. He had not asked for further details. He understood that some things in the department operated on a current of mutual benefit that did not require explicit discussion, and he understood that he was part of that current, and that was enough. 3 body cam recordings had been listed as corrupted. He had submitted the corrupted file notations himself using the standard form, and nobody had followed up because the standard form was designed to receive exactly that notation without asking further questions. The system had been built by people, and people had built into it the same tolerances and blind spots that people always build into the things they construct. Dale had not exploited those tolerances. He had simply used them, the way you use a door that has been left open, not breaking anything, just walking through. The complaints that had been withdrawn, he thought about those sometimes, not with guilt, which was too clean and too large a word for what he felt. He thought about them the way you think about something you drove past at speed and are not certain you saw correctly. Brief. Glancing. He had not done anything to those women that was outside the scope of his authority. He had exercised his judgment. The fact that those stops had generated complaints was, in his view, evidence of the gap between what the public understood about policing and what policing actually required. That gap was not his fault. He patrolled it. He had been patrolling it for 15 years. He had never once imagined there was anyone on the other side of it taking notes. He had not looked at Simone's license. He had not run her plates. He had not checked whether the stop sign violation he wrote in his incident report had actually occurred. The dashcam footage would show exactly what he had seen when he turned onto Dunmore Avenue, a silver Volvo coming to a complete lawful stop, a black woman at the wheel, a decision made in seconds. He had been on the road since 8 that morning. He had made 4 stops before hers, 2 for genuine moving violations, 1 for a broken taillight, 1 for a driver who had caught his eye, and, after 30 minutes, been released without charge and logged as a wellness check. He had stopped at the Marathon station on Ponce at 1:15, poured the third cup from a carafe that had been sitting since morning, and stood by the window with the styrofoam cup warm in his hands watching the street. A woman had walked past with a stroller. A postal worker had come in for a Gatorade. Nobody had looked at Dale. He was just a cop in a gas station, invisible unless he made himself visible, which was the only power he had left, and the thought of which that afternoon was doing something specific to his mood. When he turned onto Dunmore Avenue and saw the silver Volvo, what he would later describe to himself as professional instinct kicked in. The truth was less professional and less instinctual. The truth was that he was having the worst 3 weeks of his life, and he was behind the wheel of a car in a neighborhood where 15 years had given him unquestioned authority, and both of those things were simultaneously true and pressing against each other in a way that found its outlet in the moment he hit his lights. The official version was already assembling itself as he walked to the window. He had written enough incident reports to know the architecture of them. The passive language, the procedural framing, the way a sequence of events could be organized so that each step followed from the last with the appearance of necessity. The stop had occurred because he had observed a traffic violation. The request to exit had been made because the subject had become uncooperative. The arrest had followed because the subject had obstructed a lawful investigation. The language would hold. The language always held because the language was built to hold, and the people who reviewed it were the same people who had always reviewed it. He had no reason to think today would be different from every other day he had done this. Now he stood outside his cruiser with his arms folded, watching through the rear window as Simone sat in the back seat, straight-backed, cuffed, silent. She had not asked for water, had not asked him to loosen the cuffs, had not said a word since they put her in the car. That bothered him more than anything else she had done. He called dispatch. Mercer, badge 7742. I have a female suspect in custody at Dunmore Avenue near the 400 block, requesting backup and a transport supervisor. Dispatch confirmed. Units were rerouted. He leaned against the hood and waited. Now, if you have ever watched the moment when someone powerful makes a mistake so catastrophic that their entire world begins to unravel in real time, stay with this story. Because what happened when that backup arrived was not what Officer Dale Mercer expected, not even close. The first unit to arrive belonged to Officer Yolanda Price. Yolanda had been on the force for 8 years. She was methodical, precise, and possessed a memory for names, case numbers, and faces that her supervisors found either impressive or unsettling depending on the situation. She also held a position that very few people outside of a sealed room in the State Attorney General's building were aware of. For the past 11 months, she had been a cooperating witness in an active state investigation, the Meridian Project. She stepped out of her unit, walked to Dale's window, and asked the first question any officer would ask. What's her name? Hargrove. Simone Hargrove. Claims to work for the governor. Yolanda Price went completely still. I'll say that again. She did not wait for him to. She walked directly to the rear door of his cruiser and opened it. Simone looked up. The two women had never met in person. 8 months ago, Yolanda had attended a law enforcement accountability summit where Simone Hargrove had delivered the keynote address on civil rights compliance and officer conduct patterns in high-stop districts. Yolanda had been in the third row. She had taken 4 pages of notes. She had gone home that evening and pulled up Simone's published brief on municipal liability and read it twice. Miss Hargrove, she said quietly. Officer. Simone's voice was exactly as steady as it had been from the first moment. My government ID is on the ground behind the vehicle, about 30 feet back, near the right lane. Yolanda retrieved the badge. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she took out her own phone. Dale appeared at her shoulder. What are you doing? Calling Sergeant Hollis. I don't need, Dale. She turned and looked at him with an expression he had genuinely never seen on her face before. "Stop talking." Sergeant Frank Hollis arrived 14 minutes later. He was a 22-year veteran, known throughout the district for being moved by exactly nothing, not by rank, not by volume, not by pressure from any direction. He had also, 3 months earlier, received a sealed briefing document from the state legal office regarding an ongoing investigation into complaint rate disparities in District 7. He had been told to cooperate with any inquiry from the state AG's office and to flag anything unusual directly. He had not been told the name of the lead investigative counsel on that investigation. He stepped out of his vehicle. Yolanda handed him the badge without a word. He read it. He read it again. He closed his eyes for a single, controlled moment. Then he walked to his unit, picked up his radio, and placed a call that bypassed dispatch entirely. He called Deputy Chief Anita Caldwell directly. Caldwell had been in a budget meeting when her personal phone lit up with Hollis's name. She excused herself, stepped into the hallway, and listened without interrupting for 14 seconds. "She's cuffed," Hollis said. 31 weeks. Mercer is badge 7742. The line was quiet. 7742, Caldwell said. Not a question, a recognition. "Hollis, do you have the Meridian file reference number?" Yolanda, standing 2 feet away, said it before he could ask. "MRD 202431, Hollis relayed. One single exhale on the other end of the line. "That is the file." Caldwell's voice was level and final. "Don't move her. Don't touch anything. I'm on my way." While Caldwell drove, 2 calls went out from her assistant. The first was to Robert Ames, Governor Webb's chief of staff, a man who had worked alongside Simone for 3 years and who, upon hearing what had happened, reportedly said nothing for 4 full seconds before asking, very quietly, for the badge number of the arresting officer. The second call went to the State Attorney General's office. Simone sat in the back of Dale's cruiser and did not move more than she had to. The seat was hard plastic, molded for detainees rather than comfort, and the position it forced on her, hands cuffed behind her back, torso slightly forward, put pressure on her lower spine that she felt with every breath. She was 31 weeks pregnant, and the baby, who had been quiet all morning, was now shifting in the particular restless way she had come to recognize as discomfort. Simone breathed through it slowly and said nothing. She had been in worse rooms than this. Through the rear window, she could see Dale Mercer leaning against the hood of his cruiser, with his arms folded and his eyes fixed somewhere in the middle distance. He had the posture of a man who was certain of himself, or working very hard to remain certain. She watched him the way she watched opposing counsel in depositions, looking not at what they were showing her, but for the moment the performance began to slip. She had her phone in her head instead of her hands. She knew exactly what was on it. She had checked the cloud backup setting herself 3 months ago, after a deposition where the opposing side had claimed their recording didn't exist. It was always backing up. It had been backing up since the first second she pressed record on the shoulder of Dunmore Avenue. Every word Dale Mercer had spoken, every word she had spoken in response. The moment the handcuffs clicked, the moment she said what she said, "I have everything." She had meant it in every possible sense. Yolanda Price did not sit in the driver's seat when she returned to the cruiser. She opened the rear door on Simone's side and crouched beside the opening, keeping her voice low enough that it didn't carry. "Your doctor's information, is it in your phone?" "In the contacts. Under Dr. Patricia Reeves." "Anyone else I should call?" Simone considered for a moment. "Robert Ames. He's in there under Governor's office." Yolanda nodded once and stood. Before she closed the door, she paused. "I was at the summit," she said. 8 months ago, 3rd row." Simone looked at her. "I know who you are," Yolanda said quietly, "and I know what's in that briefcase." She closed the door and walked back toward Dale. Dale had been watching the exchange from 15 feet away, trying to read it by the shape of the words rather than their content. He couldn't. Price had kept her back to him the entire time. He had been on this road for 40 minutes now. In that time, 2 additional units had arrived without him calling for them. Hollis had shown up and immediately gone to his own car to make a call. Nobody was talking to Dale. They were talking around him, over him, past him, the way people talk in a room when they have decided that the person they are excluding is the subject of the conversation. He told himself Hollis was just running her credentials. That was routine. That was procedure. He told himself it would come back clean. The thing about a man who has spent 15 years inside the shelter of his own impunity is that the signals are all there, long before the collapse. He just does not know how to read them, because he has never had to. Deputy Chief Anita Caldwell made the drive from the precinct to Dunmore Avenue in 11 minutes, which was 4 minutes faster than the route should have taken. She did not use her sirens. She did not need to rush. What she needed was to think. She had known about Badge 7742 for 3 months. She had read the sealed briefing document from the state legal office in her car in the parking garage, then read it a second time at her desk with the door closed. She had flagged it to her supervisor with a note that said 3 words, "Watch this district." She had not been told the name of the lead counsel. She had not known what MRD 2024-31 looked like in the real world, in the flesh, on the side of a road, with handcuff marks on a woman's wrists. Quote, now she knew. She parked behind the line of cruisers and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. Through the windshield she could see the silver Volvo, Hollis standing beside his unit, Yolanda Price facing Dale Mercer with her arms crossed, and in the rear window of Dale's cruiser the still silhouette of a woman sitting perfectly upright with her hands cuffed behind her back. Caldwell got out of the car. She walked to Hollis first. He handed her the badge without her asking for it. "How long has she been in there?" Caldwell asked. 47 minutes. "Cuffed the whole time?" "Yes, ma'am." Caldwell looked at the badge once more. Then she walked to the rear door of Dale's cruiser and opened it. "Miss Hargrove," she said, "I'm Deputy Chief Caldwell. I am deeply sorry for what has happened to you today. Can you walk?" "Yes," Simone said. "Then let's get you out of there." It took 3 people to help Simone out of the cruiser without aggravating the pressure already built up in her lower back. Caldwell on one side, Yolanda on the other, a 3rd officer holding the door wide. Nobody rushed her. Nobody spoke until she was standing on the asphalt with both feet flat and her breathing even. Caldwell removed the cuffs herself. Simone looked at her wrists. The marks were red and precise, the geometry of a decision someone had made about her body 47 minutes ago. "Your car," Caldwell said. "Take your time." Dale Mercer was standing 12 feet away. He had not moved from the position he'd held since Caldwell arrived. His arms were still folded, his jaw was still set. The certainty had not entirely left his eyes, but it was working harder now. Visibly working, the way a muscle cramps when it has been held rigid for too long. Simone did not look at him. She walked to the passenger door of the Volvo, opened it, and lifted the briefcase from the seat. She carried it to the hood and set it down. She opened the clasp. The letter of engagement from the State Attorney General was on top, exactly where she had placed it that morning before she left for her appointment. The Governor's seal at the top left. Her name and title on the 3rd line. The authorization was specific. Lead Investigative Counsel, Case MRD 2024-31, Office of the Attorney General of the State of Georgia. She placed it on the hood. Then she opened the Meridian file to the tabbed page she knew by feel. 31 complaint entries. 9 flagged withdrawals. 3 corrupted body cam recordings. And near the bottom of the page, highlighted in yellow, the name that appeared more times than any other name in the entire district. Dale Mercer, Badge 742. She placed the file beside the letter. She set her government ID above both. Caldwell stood across the hood from her and read, not quickly. She read the way Simone had been trained to read documents, fully, line by line, without skipping toward the conclusion. She read the complaint entries. She read the notations beside each withdrawal. She read the 3 recordings marked corrupted. She read the margin note in Simone's handwriting. "This goes to the AG. She read the name of the woman whose complaint had been filed 18 months ago and closed in 6 days. Deanna Watts. Caldwell went very still. "This was the morning of the stop?" she asked. "I was reviewing it at my kitchen table before my prenatal appointment," Simone said. "His name was the last one I read before I got in the car." A silence opened between them that neither woman filled for a moment. "He pulled over another pregnant woman," Caldwell said, "on this road. 18 months ago. 7 months along. 43 minutes on the shoulder without a charge. She filed a complaint. It was closed within the week." Caldwell looked at the file for another long moment. Then she closed it and placed it back in the briefcase. She picked up the government ID and held it at her side. Then she turned around. Dale had been watching for the past 4 minutes with the attention of a man who knows that the reading of documents on a hood is about him, but cannot yet accept what that means. He had watched Caldwell go still once. He had watched her go still a second time. He had watched Simone Hargrove stand across that car with her wrists marked and her back straight and not look at him once. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I can explain the basis for the stop. Officer Mercer." Caldwell's voice came out flat and clean, the voice of someone who did not raise it because they had never needed to. She did not look at the file. She did not look at the badge. She looked directly at him. "I need your badge and your firearm, right now." The color left his face. "Ma'am." "Now, officer." He looked at Hollis, who was standing 8 feet to his left. Hollis looked back at him without expression. There was nothing in Hollis's face that offered anything. No sympathy, no confusion, no suggestion that this was negotiable. Dale reached for his badge. His hands were not steady. He handed over badge 742, the number that had appeared at the top of 31 complaint forms. The number that Simone Hargrove had memorized so completely she could have written it in her sleep. The number Yolanda Price had flagged in her cooperating witness reports 11 months ago. The number Sergeant Hollis had cross-referenced against a sealed briefing document in a parking garage. Badge 742. It sat in Caldwell's palm for a moment before she passed it to Hollis without looking away from Dale. "Firearm," she said. He removed it from the holster slowly, the movement of a man whose body had understood something before his mind had finished arguing. He held it out, grip first. Hollis took it. On the perimeter of the scene, beside the parked units, at the edge of where the tape had gone up, the other officers who had responded stood in silence. No one spoke. No one moved. The particular quality of that silence was not shock. It was recognition. Some of them had known about badge 7742 for years. Some of them had filed paperwork that covered for it. Some of them had heard the name Deanna Watts and said nothing. They stood very still now and watched. Sergeant Hollis read Dale Mercer his rights on the shoulder of Dunmore Avenue, beside the same silver Volvo Dale had pulled over 91 minutes earlier. He did not rush through them. He read every word at the same measured pace he brought to everything, deliberate, unembellished, the Miranda warning as it was written, without theatre and without satisfaction. Delivered to a man who had read those same words to other people more times than he could count, and had never once imagined hearing them come back to him. When Hollis finished, Dale said nothing. Yolanda Price applied the cuffs. She checked them twice. She walked Dale to a unit without a word, and as he passed the line of other officers, no one offered him anything. No look, no nod, none of the small gestures of solidarity that sometimes pass between people in the same uniform. The scene just watched him go. The rear door of Yolanda's unit closed. Dunmore Avenue was quiet after that. The afternoon had settled into the particular stillness that follows when something large has finished moving through a space. A few residents had come to their front porches. One woman stood at the end of her driveway with her arms folded, watching. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Hollis looked at Caldwell. Caldwell looked at the silver Volvo. "Get her doctor on the phone," Caldwell said. Simone had not watched Dale Mercer's arrest. She had turned away when Hollis began reading the rights and looked instead at the Meridian file, still open on the hood of her car, At the names, at the numbers, at 31 complaints and 18 months of a pattern that had been documented, flagged, and buried, until the day it arrested the one person in the state of Georgia who had the authority, the evidence, and his own name in her files. Her phone rang from Yolanda's hand. The display read, Governor's Office, R. Ames. Yolanda walked it over without a word. Simone answered. Robert Ames did not say hello. He said, Tell me you're all right. I'm standing up, she said. A pause. Caldwell is there. She's here. The governor wants to call you directly. I told him to give you an hour. Another pause, the kind that carried weight. He's not handling this well, Simone. Tell him I'm all right, she said. Tell him I'll call him tonight. She handed the phone back to Yolanda and looked out at the road. Dunmore Avenue in the late afternoon. Quiet yards. Cut grass. The sky going from white to pale gold at the edges. The kind of ordinary street that becomes extraordinary only when something extraordinary happens on it. Caldwell sat on the hood of the Volvo beside her. She did not say anything for a while, just sat. Two women on the hood of a car in the amber afternoon, one still in full uniform, one 31 weeks pregnant with red marks on her wrists. Are you okay? Caldwell asked when the silence had run its course. Simone looked down at her wrists. The marks from the handcuffs were fading slowly, the redness dispersing into the surrounding skin, the way bruises soften at the edges before they disappear. We're okay, she said. One hand moved gently to her belly. The baby had gone still, the way she went still when Simone's breathing slowed and deepened, as if she could already feel it. You were reviewing his file this morning, Caldwell said. Not a question. His full complaint history. I was on the Deanna Watts case when I left for my appointment. Simone looked at the Meridian file, still open on the hood beside her. She was 7 months pregnant. He pulled her over on this road. She filed her complaint and it was closed in 6 days. She paused. I highlighted the closing notation before I got in the car. Caldwell was quiet. This goes to the AG, Simone said softly. That's what I wrote in the margin. She almost smiled. The small, involuntary expression of someone who has just fully understood the shape of something. I didn't think I'd be the one to deliver it. You weren't supposed to be, Caldwell said. No. Simone looked out of the road. But here we are. The silence that followed was a different kind. Not uncomfortable, not weighted with anything unsaid. Just the particular quiet that comes after a thing is finished. The body cam footage, Simone said. 3 recordings listed as corrupted. IT is already on the backup server, Caldwell said. They'll find them. I know they will. Simone nodded once. Then she reached forward, closed the Meridian file, placed it back inside the briefcase, and pressed the brass clasp until it clicked shut. The charges filed that afternoon were 3, unlawful arrest, official oppression, and civil rights violation under Georgia Code, 16 to 20. Within 24 hours, the federal complaint would add 4 more. Within 72, the Meridian Project investigation would be unsealed, and the full weight of 15 years would become public record. The IT department recovered all 3 corrupted body cam recordings the following morning. Standard backup protocol. Dale Mercer had apparently never learned it existed. Each recording was time-stamped, unaltered, and fully consistent with the pattern documented across 31 complaints in MRD 2000-2431. The complaint of Deanna Watts was reopened by order of the Attorney General that same evening, added to the charge sheet before midnight. The phone footage from Simone's device, every second of it, from the moment she pressed record to the moment the phone hit the asphalt, was submitted as Exhibit A in the federal civil rights filing. It had been in the cloud since the second it started. She had said she had everything. She had meant it. Officer Dale Mercer was booked at District 7 that evening. The booking officer at District 7 was a woman named Teresa Okafor, who had processed thousands of arrests in 19 years, and prided herself on showing nothing at her desk. She showed nothing when Dale Mercer sat down across from her. She asked the standard questions in the standard order. When she got to the field for arresting charge, she typed it without pausing and without the small hesitation that sometimes crossed her face when something surprised her. She had known about badge 7742 for a long time. She had filed his paperwork. She had entered his reports into the system. She had said nothing, because in 19 years she had learned that saying nothing was how you kept your job. She typed the charge. She pressed enter. She moved on. The room was full when he came in. Officers at desks, staff in the hallway, people who had no particular reason to be standing where they were standing. Nobody said anything when he walked through. Nobody made a sound. The silence was its own verdict, delivered by people who had known the number 7742 for years and had made their own choices about what to do with that knowledge. Some of them would spend the following weeks making different choices. Some of them would not. His attorney issued a statement 2 days later. The press did not find it particularly interesting. The 9 complaint withdrawals were reopened one by one over the following 2 weeks. In 6 of the 9 cases, the Attorney General's office found evidence of contact between officers and complainants that raised serious questions about the nature of those withdrawals. 3 of those cases were referred for additional criminal review. The Meridian Project findings were made public 31 days after the arrest on Dunmore Avenue. Governor Marcus Webb held the press conference himself. Not a spokesperson, not a deputy, but the governor, standing at the podium in the state press room, flanked by the Attorney General and Deputy Chief Anita Caldwell. He announced a full structural review of complaint intake procedures across all 32 state police districts. He called for mandatory body cam retention legislation. He called for the reopening of every complaint closed by any officer in District 7 over the preceding 6 years. The state press room held roughly 80 journalists on a normal day. On the day the Meridian Project was made public, there were 114. Camera operators lined a back wall 3 rows deep. The overflow stood in the hallway watching a monitor. When Governor Webb stepped to the podium, the room went quieter than press rooms usually go. The particular silence of people who understood that what they were about to hear would require their full attention. He spoke for 22 minutes. He did not use notes. A reporter in the second row raised her hand and asked who had built the Meridian case. The governor paused, not for effect. He paused the way people pause when they are choosing the most accurate words available to them rather than the most convenient. The finest legal mind I have ever had the privilege of working with, he said. He took no further questions on the subject. Deanna Watts was in her kitchen on the Wednesday morning when her phone rang. She let it go to voicemail once. Then she saw the number and called back. The woman from the Attorney General's office was professional, warm and careful with her words. She told Deanna that her complaint had been formally reopened, that the officer had been charged, that her testimony was being sought, that she was not alone in this. Deanna set the phone face down on the table when the call ended and sat for a long time looking at the window. She had spent 18 months telling herself it was over, that the system had looked at what happened to her on Dunmore Avenue, on this very road, in a car not unlike the silver Volvo, and decided it was nothing. She had filed the report because someone told her to. She had let it go because letting it go was the only way she knew how to keep living inside her own skin. I drove past that road for 18 months, she told her sister later on the phone. Every time I thought about that day, every time I told myself to stop thinking about it. And then one morning, the phone rang and the whole thing turned out to have been going somewhere all along. It just hadn't told me. What she did not say in the interview, what she told only to her sister later on the phone, was that she had stood at her window for a long time after the call ended, watching the ordinary Tuesday morning of it, cars going past, a neighbor walking a dog, the trash truck making its slow way down the block, all of it the same as it had always been, and somehow also completely different, in the way that the world is different after something inside it finally shifts. She said in the interview that ran 3 weeks after the press conference, "I thought it was just me. I thought I was the only one who knew what that man was. And then I found out there were 31 of us. And I thought, who was number 32 going to be? She paused. She was 32, Deanna said, and she walked out of it with a briefcase full of all our names. Simone Renee Hargrove gave birth to a healthy daughter 6 weeks later on a Thursday morning at 6:47 a.m. in a delivery room at Emory University Hospital with 2 nurses, 1 midwife, and a doctor who had been monitoring her since week 16. 7 pounds 4 ounces. Strong lungs. Eyes that came open in the first minute and stayed that way, looking at everything. She named her Deanna. 6 days after the birth, Simone sat in the hospital recliner with Deanna asleep on her chest and her phone in one hand. She opened the Meridian file on her laptop just to look at it and closed it again after a minute. The case was moving. It didn't need her tonight. Tonight it could wait. She did not explain the name to most people who asked. Some things do not need to be explained to the right people, and the wrong people will not understand regardless of the explanation. She was back at her desk, partially, and against her doctor's firm but gentle objections, within 3 months. The Meridian trial was in pre-trial motions. 3 additional officers in District 7 were under formal review. The body cam reform bill had cleared its second committee hearing and was scheduled for a full chamber vote. Some mornings before Deanna woke up, Simone would sit at her desk in the early quiet and open her laptop without opening any files. Just sit with the blue light and the silence and the baby monitor and the particular stillness of a house before it begins. On those mornings, she thought about Dunmore Avenue, about the boots on the asphalt, about 31 women whose complaints had gone into a file that went into a system designed, in every small procedural way, to make sure nothing happened. Something had happened. The briefcase sat in the corner of her home office, same dark leather, same brass governor's seal clasp, the one she had carried since her first day, the one she carried into court, into briefing rooms, into the governor's office on the hardest days. The one Dale Mercer had looked at through the passenger window of a silver Volvo and demanded she open. She had said no. One word. No performance, no argument, no fear. Just the steady, immovable fact of a woman who knew exactly who she was and exactly what she carried. That word had started everything. If you know someone whose complaint was buried, whose story was dismissed, whose voice was told it didn't matter, this story is for them. Justice doesn't always come quickly. Sometimes it takes someone with a briefcase full of your name, pulled over on the same road you were pulled over on, who looks up and says, "Not today, not again, never again." Like and follow for more stories of dignity, strength, and the kind of justice that cannot be buried.